I handed my daughter the keys to a $2 million farm, hoping it would be her sanctuary. But when I walked through the kitchen door unannounced 6 months later, I found her on her knees, scrubbing the floor while her mother-in-law kicked a bucket of dirty water onto her fresh work. They laughed at her tears, and then they laughed at me, thinking I was just a senile old man looking for a handout. They had no idea I was the one holding the mortgage, the deed, and the power to ruin their entire lives before dinner was even served. Before I tell you how I evicted my own family, let me know in the comments if you have ever dealt with in-laws who thought they were better than you. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not bought. My name is Gus Wainwright, and I spent 40 years building an industrial real estate empire from a single tool shed in Ohio. I know the value of dirt, and I know the value of $1. But my daughter Sarah never quite learned how to spot a wolf in sheep's clothing. I drove my 1985 Ford pickup truck down the long gravel driveway of what was supposed to be Sarah's fresh start. The suspension creaked and the engine rattled, but this truck had outlasted 2 marriages and 3 recessions. I expected to see the wooden sign I had hand-carved for her that read Sarah's Bakery and Farm hanging by the main gate. Instead, I saw a monstrosity. A massive iron gate blocked the path with a sleek black and gold sign that read, "The Wainwright Estate and Country Club." My stomach turned. I had given this land to my daughter to grow organic wheat and start her bakery, not to host pretenders playing polo. I rolled down the window as a young security guard in a uniform that cost more than my truck stepped out of a booth that had not been there 6 months ago. He looked at my faded flannel shirt and my grease-stained cap and sneered. "Deliveries are round back, old-timer," he said, waving me away without even checking a clipboard. I did not argue. I did not tell him I bought this land with cash before he was born. I just nodded and shifted into gear, driving around the perimeter to the service entrance. The gravel lot behind the main house was full, but not with tractors or delivery vans. It looked like a luxury car dealership. There were 3 Mercedes SUVs, a Porsche, and a vintage Jaguar that I knew my son-in-law Bradley could not afford on his salary as a part-time fitness instructor. I parked my rusted truck right between the Porsche and the Jaguar, leaving just enough room to open my door, but not enough for them to open theirs without scratching paint. I wanted to send a message, even if they did not understand it yet. I walked up the back steps to the kitchen porch. The house was a beautiful colonial revival I had restored with my own hands, hiring only the best contractors for the foundation, but doing the finish work myself. I expected to smell yeast and cinnamon. Sarah made the best sourdough in the county. Instead, I smelled expensive perfume and chemical cleaner. I reached for the handle, but stopped when I heard a crash, followed by a shrill voice screaming, "You call this clean, you useless girl? Do it again, and this time use your fingernails if you have to." My blood ran cold. That was Patricia, my daughter's mother-in-law, a woman who claimed to be a descendant of French royalty, but had a credit score lower than my blood pressure. I opened the door quietly. The scene before me made my hands curl into fists so tight my knuckles turned white. My Sarah, my beautiful, talented 32-year-old daughter, was on her hands and knees in the center of the kitchen. She was wearing a gray uniform that looked like a maid outfit stained with grease and water. Her hair was matted to her forehead with sweat. Standing over her was Patricia, holding a glass of white wine in one hand and pointing a manicured finger with the other. "I missed a spot," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "You missed the whole floor," Patricia snapped. She took a step back and deliberately kicked the plastic bucket next to Sarah. Gray, soapy water sloshed out, soaking Sarah's knees and spreading across the tiles she had just dried. "Now look what you made me do," Patricia said, taking a sip of wine. "Clean it up before the investors arrive, or so help me God, I will have Bradley lock you in the basement again." Again. The word echoed in my mind. I stepped fully into the kitchen, allowing the screen door to slam shut behind me. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense room. Patricia spun around, spilling a drop of wine on her white silk blouse. She glared at me with disgust, not recognition. I had only met her twice, briefly at the wedding 5 years ago, and I was wearing a tuxedo then. Now in my work boots and flannel, she saw only a servant. "Finally, the help is here," she huffed, wiping her blouse. "You are late. Dawn is useless. Grab that mop and help her dry this floor. We have guests arriving in an hour, and the kitchen smells like wet dog." I did not move. I stood there staring at my daughter. Sarah looked up and her eyes went wide with terror. Not relief, terror. She looked from me to Patricia and back to me, shaking her head slightly as if begging me not to make a scene. "Dad," she whispered. Patricia laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound. "Dad? Oh, honey, did you adopt a stray grandfather to help you with the chores? How quaint." She reached into her purse on the counter and pulled out a dirty apron, throwing it at my chest. It hit me and fell to the floor. "Put it on, old man," Patricia ordered. "And carry those boxes of wine to the dining room. If you are fast, I might give you a $20 tip." I looked at the apron on the floor. Then I looked at Sarah. She was crying silently now, tears dripping into the dirty water on the floor. I walked past the apron. I walked past Patricia, ignoring her gasp of indignation. I went straight to my daughter and extended my hand. "Get up, Sarah," I said. My voice was low and rough, like gravel in a cement mixer. She flinched as if she expected me to hit her. That reaction told me everything I needed to know about her life for the past 6 months. "Dad, please, you have to leave," she whispered frantically. "Bradley will be so angry. They have a big dinner tonight. Please just go." "I am not going anywhere," I said. "Take my hand." Patricia stepped between us, blocking my reach. She was a small woman, but her ego took up the whole room. "Excuse me," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "Who do you think you are, barging into my kitchen and distracting the staff? I will have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing." I looked down at her. Her eyes were glazed with alcohol and arrogance. "Your kitchen?" I asked calmly. "My kitchen," she declared. "My house, my estate. Now get out before I have my son throw you out." As if summoned by the devil himself, the swinging doors to the dining room burst open. Bradley walked in, wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was too big. He looked like a man playing dress-up in his father's closet. He stopped when he saw me. A smirk spread across his face, a look of pure condescension. "Well, well, well. Look who decided to show up," Bradley said, walking over to the fridge and grabbing a bottle of imported water. "Gus, I assume you are here because you ran out of retirement money." He leaned against the counter, taking a long sip of water while Sarah remained on her knees, trembling. "I am not here for money, Bradley," I said, keeping my eyes on him. "I am here to see my daughter." "Why is she on the floor?" Bradley chuckled. "She likes it down there, don't you, babe? It is the only thing she's good at, cleaning up messes." He gestured vaguely around the room. "We are turning this dump into a world-class resort, Gus. Sarah's just pitching in. We all have our roles. I'm the brains, my parents are the face, and Sarah, well, she is the labor." It saves us overhead costs." Sarah let out a sob. Bradley rolled his eyes and kicked the bucket again, this time hitting Sarah's leg. "Stop crying," he snapped. "You are embarrassing me in front of your father. Get up and make him a plate of scraps or something so he can leave. I have investors coming to see the golf course plans." Golf course? I looked around the kitchen. I had designed for a commercial bakery. I looked at the daughter I had raised to be strong and independent, now reduced to a shivering wreck. And I looked at the son-in-law I had welcomed into my family. I stepped forward, pushing past Patricia. I grabbed Sarah's arm gently but firmly and pulled her to her feet. Her knees were wet and red. She smelled of bleach and fear. "She is not cleaning another inch," I said. "And she is certainly not cooking for your investors." Bradley laughed again, but this time there was an edge to it. He set the water bottle down hard. "Look, Gus, I know you are senile and probably forgot how the world works, but you gave this place to us. It is ours. Sarah does what I tell her to do because I am her husband and her legal guardian." "Guardian?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "Yeah," Bradley said, puffing out his chest. "She has been having episodes. Depression, hysteria. We had to get power of attorney just to keep the business running. She is not fit to make decisions." "So really, you are trespassing on my property," Patricia chimed in, looking delighted. "That is right. We have the papers." "So take your old truck and your bad smell and get off our land." I looked at Sarah. She was looking at the floor, ashamed. "Is that true, Sarah?" I asked. "Did you sign papers?" She nodded, barely moving. "They said they would take Leo away," she whispered. "They said I was sick. Leo, my grandson, he was only 4 years old." "Where is Leo?" I asked, turning back to Bradley. "He is at boarding school," Patricia answered quickly. "A very exclusive preschool in the city. We could not have a child running around underfoot while we are trying to run a business. He is better off there." They had sent a 4-year-old to boarding school. They had enslaved my daughter, and they were planning to pave over the farm to build a golf course. I felt a calm settle over me. It was the cold, deadly calm of a man who knows exactly where the bodies are buried, because he dug the holes. I reached into my back pocket. Bradley flinched, thinking I was reaching for a weapon. I pulled out a handkerchief and handed it to Sarah. "Dry your face, honey," I said. Then I turned to Patricia and Bradley. "You think you own this place?" I asked. "We do own it," Patricia spat. "Now get out." I took a step toward her. She retreated until her back hit the granite island. "Let me clarify something for you," I said, my voice steady and loud enough to rattle the copper pots hanging from the ceiling. "I built this house. I poured the foundation. I framed the walls. And I paid for every single tile you are standing on. You think a piece of paper makes you the owner? You think bullying my daughter makes you powerful?" Bradley stepped up, trying to intimidate me. He was taller than me, but soft. I was 70, but I was made of iron and concrete. "Get out, old man," he threatened, "or I will call the sheriff." "Call him," I said. "Call the sheriff. Call the state troopers. Call the president for all I care. But while you are waiting for them to arrive, you might want to ask your lawyers about Clause 14B of the Deed of Gift." Bradley blinked. "Clause what?" "You did not read it, did you?" I said, smiling a smile that had no joy in it. "You were so busy stealing my daughter's life, you didn't bother to read the fine print." I turned to Sarah and put an arm around her shoulder. "Go upstairs and pack a bag, Sarah. You and I are going to a hotel." She cannot leave, Bradley shouted, grabbing Sarah's other arm. She has work to do. I swatted his hand away with a speed that surprised even me. The sound of my heavy hand striking his wrist echoed like a pistol crack. Bradley yelped and cradled his arm. Touch her again, I whispered, and you will be eating your dinner through a straw. Patricia gasped. You assaulted him. I saw it. You are violent. I ignored her. Go, Sarah. Pack for Leo, too. We are getting him tonight. But Sarah hesitated, looking at Bradley with fear. He says he owns everything, Dad. He owns nothing, I said. And in about 3 hours, he is going to wish he never learned how to spell the name Wainwright. I looked at the floor where the dirty water was still pooling. And Patricia, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Yes? She asked, trembling with rage. I suggest you start mopping, I said, because I am the one who owns the floor you are standing on, and I like my floors clean. I turned my back on them and led my daughter out of the kitchen, leaving them stunned in the wreckage of their own arrogance. But I knew this was just the opening shot. They were greedy, and greed makes people stupid, but it also makes them dangerous. I had to move fast. As we walked to my truck, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the only man in the state who hated these people more than I did. My lawyer, Mr. Blackwood. It is time, Arthur, I said into the phone. Initiate the protocol. Burn it all down. I walked into the dining room, and for a moment I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The room I had built with hand-hewn beams and warm lighting had been transformed into something cold and sterile. The rustic farmhouse table where Sarah used to do her homework was covered in a white tablecloth so stiff it looked like a shroud. But what made the bile rise in my throat was not the decor. It was the man sitting at the head of the table. Richard was sprawled in the master chair, the high-backed oak captain chair I had carved in my shop 30 years ago for my own father. It was the seat of the provider, the protector of the house. And there sat Richard, a man who had never protected anything but his own fragile ego, acting as if he were the King of England holding court. Patricia pointed to a folding metal chair set up in the far corner, away from the main table near the kitchen door. That is your spot, Gus, she said without looking at me. We do not want you cluttering up the main table while we discuss business. Sit there and be quiet, and maybe Sarah will bring you a plate when we are done. I did not argue. I sat in the rickety metal chair, my knees bumping against the wall, and watched. Sarah was running back and forth from the kitchen carrying heavy platters of roast beef and glazed carrots, serving them like a waitress at a diner. There was no place set for her. Bradley was already eating, stuffing his face with the food my daughter had cooked, without even waiting for her to sit down. The conversation at the table was loud and performative, designed to make them feel important. Richard swirled his wine glass, spilling a little on the expensive tablecloth, and leaned forward, his face flushed with greed. The geography is perfect for the back nine, Richard announced, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. We bulldozed the apple orchard and put the clubhouse right on that hill. I have already spoken to the zoning commissioner. He is a close personal friend. We play poker together. He said rezoning this agricultural dump into commercial land will be a rubber stamp formality. I gripped the sides of my metal chair. The apple orchard. I had planted those trees with Sarah when she was 5 years old. We had named every single tree. And this man, this parasite, wanted to bulldoze them for a clubhouse. Patricia nodded enthusiastically, her eyes glittering. It is brilliant, Richard. The Wainwright Country Club has such a ring to it. We can sell memberships for $50,000 a pop. I have friends in the city who are desperate for a new exclusive spot. We will be the talk of the season." The irony was suffocating. They were talking about selling memberships to high society, while I sat in the corner knowing the truth about their finances. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of Richard. He was wearing a gold Rolex that flashed under the chandelier light every time he gestured. To the untrained eye, it looked impressive. But I spent 40 years in business. I know quality. I watched the second hand on that watch. It ticked. Tick, tick, tick. A real Rolex sweeps. It glides. That watch was a $50 knockoff, probably bought from a street vendor. Then I looked at his shoes. He had them propped up on the leg of my table. They were shiny black leather, or at least they tried to look like it. But near the heel, the finish was peeling away, revealing the cheap, bonded synthetic material underneath. A man who claims to play poker with zoning commissioners does not wear plastic shoes. And a man with millions in the bank does not wear a counterfeit watch. I knew exactly who Richard was. Before I came here, I had my lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, run a full background check. Richard was not a developer. He was a failed insurance salesman with 3 bankruptcies on his record and a gambling addiction that had him banned from 2 casinos in Atlantic City. He was currently carrying over $400,000 in debt to private lenders. The kind of lenders who break kneecaps when you miss a payment. That was why they were so desperate to build this golf course. They did not want to build a legacy. They wanted to flip the land, pay off their sharks, and run before the house of cards collapsed. Bradley wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and chimed in, desperate to please his father. "I can manage the clubhouse, Dad. I have great ideas for the gym and the spa. We can cut costs by using the existing barn materials for the framing." "Tear down the barn." My chest tightened. That barn was 100 years old. Richard laughed, slapping the table. "That is my boy. Thinking like a CEO. We will strip this place for parts. The land is the only thing of value here anyway. The rest of this sentimental rustic garbage is just firewood." He looked right at me as he said it. He looked me in the eye and smiled a shark-like grin, daring me to say something. He wanted me to react. He wanted the old man to yell so he could throw me out. But I stayed silent. I let them talk. I let them dig their hole deeper with every word. Sarah came out of the kitchen holding a pitcher of water. She looked exhausted, pale and thin. She moved to refill Richard's glass, but her hand trembled and a few drops splashed onto the table. Richard slammed his hand down, making the silverware jump. "You clumsy idiot," he roared. "Can you do nothing right? This is Italian linen." Sarah flinched, shrinking away from him. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Bradley did not defend her. He did not even look up from his roast beef. "Get a towel and fix it, Sarah," he mumbled with his mouth full. "And stop shaking. It is pathetic." Patricia scoffed. "Honestly, I do not know how you raised her, Gus. She has no grace, no poise. She is barely fit to serve the food, let alone eat it with us." That is why we did not set a place for her. She can eat in the kitchen when the work is done. It is better for her figure anyway. I looked at my daughter, the girl who used to run through these fields laughing. The woman who had graduated with honors, who had dreams of baking bread for the whole county. They had broken her. They had reduced her to a servant in her own home. Richard turned back to Bradley, dismissing Sarah as if she were a fly. Anyway, as I was saying, the investors are coming to the gala on Saturday. We need to make sure the papers are finalized by then. Once we sell the first round of lots, we will have enough cash to start the demolition. Demolition? They were going to destroy everything. By the way, Richard added, pointing a fork at me, Gus, you will need to move your truck. It is an eyesore. In fact, do not come to the gala. We are trying to project an image of wealth and success. Having a mechanic wandering around would ruin the aesthetic. I stood up slowly. The metal chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through their conversation. They all turned to look at me. I am not a mechanic, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. Richard rolled his eyes. Whatever you are, retired, unemployed, just stay out of the way. I walked over to the table. I stood directly behind Richard. I placed my heavy, calloused hand on the back of the chair he was sitting in. My chair. You are sitting in my seat, Richard, I said. He laughed nervously, looking at Bradley and Patricia for support. Excuse me, this is the head of the table. It belongs to the man of the house, and since my son owns the deed, that makes me the patriarch here. I leaned down close to his ear. I could smell the cheap cologne he used to mask the scent of his fear. Enjoy the view from the head of the table while you can, I whispered. Because from where I am standing, your watch looks fake. Your shoes look cheap. And your stories sound like the desperate lies of a man who owes a lot of money to some very bad people. Richard's face went pale. He pulled his wrist under the table, hiding the watch. What did you say? He hissed. I straightened up and looked at Bradley. And you, I said. You let your father talk about demolishing this farm. You let your mother treat your wife like a slave. You are eating the food she cooked, and you did not even save her a bite. Bradley stood up, wiping his mouth. Now listen here, Gus. You have no right to come into our house and insult us. Our house, I repeated. We will see about that. I turned to Sarah, who was standing by the kitchen door, clutching a dish rag like a lifeline. The dinner was lovely, Sarah, I said gently. But the company is rotten. I walked to the door. Richard shouted after me, trying to regain his composure. Walk away, old man. Go back to your trailer park. You are nothing. You are a nobody. When we sell this place, we will send you a postcard from our yacht. I paused at the door. I did not turn around. I just smiled a cold, hard smile that they could not see. A yacht, I said to the empty air. That is funny. It is hard to sail a yacht when you are drowning. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them to their delusions. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me. But they had just given me everything I needed. They had admitted their plans. They had shown their weakness. And they had underestimated the man who built the roof over their heads. I took my phone out of my pocket. I had recorded the entire dinner. Every insult, every threat, every admission of their plan to bulldoze the farm. It was time to make a call. It was time to remind them who really owned the ground they were standing on. I found Sarah in the pantry, clutching a dish rag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The dinner guests had moved to the living room, their laughter echoing through the halls like the cackle of hyenas feasting on a carcass. But in here it was quiet. It was the silence of a woman who had been screaming on the inside for so long she had forgotten how to make a sound. I closed the door behind me, locking us in. Sarah jumped, her eyes darting to the lock with the instinct of a trapped animal. "Show me the books, Sarah," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was heavy. It left no room for argument. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Dad, please don't. Bradley handles the finances now. He says I get confused. He says the numbers stress me out, and that is bad for my recovery." Recovery. I took a step closer. The smell of stale wine and expensive perfume from the dining room still clung to my clothes. But in here, it smelled like fear. "What recovery, Sarah?" I asked. "You are healthy. You are strong. You graduated top of your class in business management. You ran a bakery with 5 employees before you met him. Since when do numbers confuse you?" She looked down at her hands. Her fingers were red and raw from the cleaning chemicals. "Since Leo was born," she whispered. "Since the Depression." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew my daughter. She had been tired after the baby, sure. Who isn't? But she hadn't been broken. "Tell me exactly what they told you," I commanded. Sarah took a shaky breath. She leaned against the shelves lined with the expensive gourmet ingredients Patricia had forced her to buy. "They said I was dangerous, Dad. They said I was forgetting things, leaving the stove on, leaving the back door open. Bradley would come home and ask why I hadn't fed the baby, and I would swear I had, but he would show me the full bottle. He would tell me I was losing time, that I was blacking out." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. Gaslighting. It was the oldest trick in the abuser's handbook. Make the victim doubt their own mind, and you can take everything they have. "And then his parents came," she continued, her voice cracking. "Patricia told me stories about women who hurt their babies because of postpartum psychosis. She said I had the look. She said if I didn't let them help me run the estate, if I didn't step back and let Bradley take legal control, they would have to call Child Protective Services. They said they would take Leo away to keep him safe from me." I felt a cold fury rising in my gut. It was a coldness that started in my toes and froze my veins. They had used my grandson as leverage. They had threatened a mother with the loss of her child to steal a piece of land. "Where are the papers, Sarah?" She hesitated, looking at the door as if expecting Bradley to burst in. "They keep them in the safe in the study," she whispered. "But I have a copy. I hid a copy under the floorboards in the pantry, just in case." She got down on her hands and knees, pulling up a loose wooden plank in the corner behind a sack of flour. She pulled out a manila envelope. It was dusty and crumpled. She handed it to me with trembling hands. I opened it. Inside was a document titled Durable Power of Attorney. I put on my reading glasses and began to scan the text. I had read thousands of contracts in my life. I knew the language of business. But this was not business. This was a confession of theft written in legal jargon. The document granted Bradley full autonomy over Sarah's assets. It gave him the right to sell, lease, and manage the property. But as I read further, I found the clause that made my blood boil. Clause 23, subsection C. The agent shall have the authority to encumber the principal property with loans, mortgages, and lines of credit for the purpose of business development and personal maintenance. Personal maintenance. That was the key. It meant Bradley could take out a loan against the farm and use the money to buy a sports car or pay off his father's gambling debts, and it would be perfectly legal under this document. They weren't just planning to build a golf course. They were planning to mortgage the farm to the hilt, extract every ounce of equity, and leave Sarah with the debt when the whole thing inevitably crashed. I looked at the date on the signature. It was dated 3 months ago. "Sarah," I said, pointing to the signature, "did you sign this in front of a notary?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "They brought a man to the house. Mr. Henderson. He said he was a friend of Richard's. He told me it was just a temporary measure, just until I got better. He said if I signed it, they wouldn't call the social workers. He said it was the only way to keep our family together." Henderson. I knew that name. He was a disbarred lawyer who now operated out of a strip mall doing shady title loans. Of course he was a friend of Richard's. Birds of a feather flock together, especially when they are vultures picking at a carcass. "This document is a fraud, Sarah," I said, tapping the paper. "It was signed under duress. They coerced you. They threatened you. That makes it voidable. But we have to prove it." "I cannot prove it," she sobbed. "It is my word against theirs. And everyone thinks I am crazy. They have told the whole town I am unstable. Even the doctor they took me to said I needed rest and supervision." "Which doctor?" I asked, sharp and fast. "Dr. Vane," she said. I almost laughed. Dr. Vane was a chiropractor who lost his license for insurance fraud 5 years ago. He wasn't a psychiatrist. He wasn't even a medical doctor anymore. They had built a house of cards so flimsy a stiff breeze would knock it over. But they counted on Sarah being too scared to blow. I folded the document and put it in my inside pocket next to my heart. "You are not crazy, Sarah," I said, grabbing her shoulders and forcing her to look at me. "You are exhausted. You are terrified. And you have been manipulated by 3 sociopaths who would sell their own souls for a country club membership. But you are not crazy." I looked around the pantry. "Is there anything else? Any other papers they made you sign?" She shook her head. "Just checks. Bradley makes me sign blank checks from the farm account every week. He says it is for supplies. But we never get any supplies, Dad. The tractors are broken. The barn roof is leaking. I do not know where the money is going." I knew exactly where the money was going. It was going to pay the interest on Richard's private loans. It was going to lease the Mercedes SUVs parked outside. It was going to buy the fake Rolex on Richard's wrist. They were bleeding the farm dry, 1 check at a time. I took a deep breath. "Listen to me carefully, Sarah. Tonight you are going to do exactly what they say. You are going to serve them coffee if they ask. You are going to clean the kitchen. You are going to play the part of the broken woman one last time." "But why?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "You said we were leaving." "We are," I promised. "But first I need to secure the evidence. If we leave now, they will shred everything in that study. They will hide the money trail. I need 1 night, just 1 night to get into that safe and find out exactly how deep this hole is." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small burner phone I kept for emergencies. I pressed it into her hand. "Hide this," I said. "Do not use it unless you are in physical danger. If they touch you, if they even look like they are going to hurt you, call the police first and then call me. I will be parked at the end of the service road. I am not leaving the property. I will be watching." Sarah clutched the phone like a talisman. "What are you going to do, Dad?" "I am going to do what I do best," I said, my voice turning cold. "I am going to inspect the property." I kissed her on the forehead. It tasted of salt and sweat. "Be brave, Sarah. Tomorrow morning the sun comes up and the vermin scatter. But tonight I have to hunt." I turned and walked out of the pantry, leaving her there with a spark of hope in her eyes that hadn't been there an hour ago. I walked back through the kitchen where the dirty water had dried into sticky streaks on the tile. I could hear Bradley in the living room laughing at something his father said. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the old man in the flannel shirt was powerless. I stepped out onto the back porch. The night air was crisp. I walked to my truck and opened the toolbox in the bed. I didn't take out a wrench or a hammer. I took out a pair of bolt cutters and a high-powered flashlight. I wasn't a mechanic tonight. I was an auditor. And I was about to conduct the most thorough audit of Richard and Bradley's lives they had ever seen. I looked toward the barn where the office was located. The lights were off. Perfect. It was time to see what else they were hiding in the dark. I walked toward the staircase, intending to find the guest room I had framed myself 5 years ago. It was a corner room with a view of the southern pasture, and I needed a few hours of sleep before I started my war. But Patricia was standing on the bottom step, blocking my path, like a gargoyle in a silk robe. She held a glass of brandy and looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Where do you think you are going?" she asked, swirling her drink. "I am going to sleep, Patricia," I said, "unless you sold the beds, too." She laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "The guest rooms are occupied. I turned the south room into my meditation studio, and Richard uses the north room for his model trains. We cannot have you snoring in the main house. It disrupts the energy." She pointed a manicured finger toward the darkness of the backyard. "There is a cot in the equipment shed. It is dry enough." That is where the gardener sleeps when he works late. It should be familiar territory for a man of your background. I looked at her, and for a second I considered buying the bank that held her mortgage, just to foreclose on it by morning. But I held my tongue. The shed was better anyway. It was the only place on this property that still felt honest. I walked out into the cold night air. The shed was an old corrugated metal structure, about 50 yards from the main house. I had built it to store tractors and tools, but when I slid the heavy door open, I realized it had been repurposed. It wasn't full of farming equipment anymore. It was a graveyard for their secrets. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dusty air, illuminating stacks of plastic storage bins and cardboard boxes piled high against the walls. They were shoved behind old tires and covered with tarps, as if someone wanted them hidden but didn't have the energy to destroy them. In the center of the room was a rusted military cot with a thin, stained mattress. I sat on it, testing the springs. It creaked under my weight. This was the hospitality they offered the man who gave them a $2 million asset. I lay down for a moment, staring at the metal rafters, but sleep was impossible. My mind was racing with the image of Sarah's tear-stained face. I sat up. The box directly across from me caught my eye. It was a high-quality banker box labeled Richard's Office, Do Not Touch. I walked over to it. The tape was peeling. I pulled the lid off. What I found inside was not business records for a country club. It was an autopsy of a financial disaster. The first layer was letters, hundreds of them, all unopened, all with red stamps that said, "Final Notice." I picked one up. It was a foreclosure warning for a property in Connecticut. Richard and Patricia claimed to have a summer estate in the Hamptons, but according to this letter, their primary residence was a rented condo in a strip mall in Bridgeport, and they were 6 months behind on rent. I dug deeper. Under the rent notices were the gambling records. Richard wasn't just a bad gambler. He was a catastrophic one. I found markers from 3 different underground casinos, "I owe us," signed with shaky handwriting. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. There was a letter from a man named Vinny. It was handwritten on greasy notebook paper. It said simply, "Richard, you have until the 1st of the month. After that, we take a finger for every 1,000. The date on the letter was 3 weeks ago. That explained the rush. That explained the desperation to sell the farm. They weren't building a legacy. They were trying to save their own limbs. But it was the folder at the bottom of the box that made me stop breathing. It was a blue folder labeled Post-Sale Transition. I opened it and shone my flashlight on the pages. It was an email exchange between Bradley and his parents, printed out and filed away. The email from Patricia read, "Once the zoning comes through and we sell the parcels to the developer, we will have approximately 4 million liquid. We pay Vinny. We pay off the car leases. That leaves us with 3 million. We can move to Boca." Bradley's reply was underneath. "What about Sarah? She won't want to move to Florida. She thinks we are keeping the bakery." And then Richard's response, the words that sealed his fate. "Sarah is a liability. Once the sale is finalized, her signature is irrelevant. We file for divorce on grounds of mental instability. We use the medical records Dr. Vane faked to get full custody of the kid. We drop her off at a state-run facility or a cheap studio apartment in the city. Give her $5,000 and a bus ticket. She is weak, Bradley. She will fold. We take the money and the kid, and we start over." I read the email 3 times. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat in my veins. They were not just stealing the land. They were planning to discard my daughter like a piece of trash. They were going to steal my grandson and leave Sarah with nothing but a fake diagnosis and a broken heart. I took out my phone and photographed every single page. I photographed the gambling debts, the threats from Vinny, the foreclosure notices, and the email chain plotting the destruction of my daughter. I put the papers back in the box exactly as I found them. Then I sat back on the cot in the freezing dark. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt nothing but the focus of a predator. They thought I was sleeping in a shed like a dog. They didn't know I was sitting on a nuclear bomb. Tomorrow morning, I wouldn't just stop the sale. I was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece. I looked at my watch. It was 3 in the morning. In 4 hours, the sun would rise. And in 5 hours, Richard would wish he had let Vinny take his fingers, because what I was going to do to him was going to be much, much worse. I closed my eyes and waited for the dawn. I slipped out of the equipment shed before the sun broke the horizon. The main house was silent, a dark monument to greed and deception looming over the property I had bought with blood and sweat. I rolled my truck down the gravel driveway in neutral, keeping the headlights off until I hit the county road. I could not risk waking Richard or Bradley. They thought I was a defeated old man sleeping on a cot, but I was a general gathering his troops, and my first lieutenant was waiting for me at the Iron Horse. The Iron Horse was a dive bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where third-shift factory workers went to wash away the night with cheap beer and silence. It smelled of sawdust and stale tobacco. In the back booth, sitting under a flickering neon sign, was Hank. He had managed this farm for 20 years. He knew every acre, every fence post, every soil pH level. When I gave the farm to Sarah, Hank was part of the gift. He was supposed to be her mentor, her safety net. But seeing him now, slumped over a mug of black coffee, wearing a jacket that had seen better days, I realized he was just another casualty of my son-in-law's ambition. Hank stood up when he saw me. He looked 10 years older than the last time we spoke. His face was weathered and lined with stress, but his eyes were clear. He didn't offer a smile, There was nothing to smile about. "Mr. Wainwright," he said, his voice rough. "I did not think you would come." I sat down opposite him. The vinyl booth squeaked. "I told you to call me Gus, Hank. And I told you I would fix this. Now tell me why you are not on a tractor right now. Tell me why Sarah thinks you retired to Florida." Hank let out a bitter laugh. "Florida? Is that what they told her?" "They fired me, Gus, 2 months ago." Bradley came out to the field in his shiny Italian loafers and told me my services were no longer required. He said I was old school. He said they were pivoting to a hospitality model and didn't need a dirt farmer slowing them down. He took a sip of coffee, his hand shaking slightly. "But that was not the real reason, Gus. They fired me because I started asking questions about the inventory." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver USB drive. He placed it on the sticky table between us. It looked harmless enough, but the way Hank looked at it told me it was radioactive. "What is on that drive, Hank?" I asked. "Evidence," he whispered, leaning in. "Before they cut my access to the security system, I made a backup. They thought they wiped the servers. They thought they were smart, but they forgot that I installed those cameras myself 10 years ago to catch coyotes." I picked up the drive. It felt cold in my hand. "What did you catch, Hank?" "You know that John Deere combine harvester you bought for the harvest last year?" Hank asked. "The S700 series, the one that cost you $400,000. I nodded. It was a beast of a machine, top of the line. I bought it so Sarah wouldn't have to contract out the harvesting. It was an asset, a tool for independence. "Sarah thinks it broke down," Hank said. "Bradley told her the engine block cracked, and it was going to cost more to fix than it was worth. He told her he had it hauled away for scrap." I felt a tightening in my chest. A combine engine does not just crack after one season. It is on the drive, Gus, time-stamped 3 weeks ago, 2 in the morning. Hank tapped the table with a calloused finger. "Bradley brought a flatbed truck in through the south gate. No plates, shady-looking guys. They loaded the combine up. It was running perfectly fine, Gus. I saw Bradley drive it onto the ramp himself. And then I saw the other guy hand Bradley a gym bag." "A gym bag?" "Cash. He sold it, Gus," Hank said, his voice filled with disgust. "He sold a $500,000 machine to a fence for cash. And not just the combine, the Kubota tractors, the irrigation pumps, the new generator you installed for the bakery. They are stripping the place down to the studs. They are selling everything that isn't bolted down and pocketing the cash while Sarah wonders why the business is failing." I clenched my fist around the USB drive. This was not just mismanagement. This was grand larceny. This was embezzlement. Bradley was systematically looting the company assets to fund his parents' lifestyle and pay off his father's debts. "Why didn't you go to the police, Hank?" "I tried," Hank said, looking down. "I went to Sheriff Miller, but Bradley beat me to it. He told the sheriff I was a disgruntled ex-employee. He said I was stealing tools, and he fired me for theft. He showed the sheriff a fake inventory list. Miller told me if I set foot on the property again, he would arrest me for trespassing. They destroyed my reputation, Gus. I cannot get a job anywhere in this county." I looked at this man who had given 20 years of loyal service to my family. He was broke, unemployed, and slandered because he tried to protect my daughter. My rage shifted focus. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the people they had hurt. The lives they had ruined to buy fake watches and lease luxury cars. "You still have the keys to the back gate?" I asked. Hank nodded. "I never gave them back." I figured someday someone might need to get in without being seen. Good, I said, standing up. Keep them. And keep your phone on. I'm going to need you later. Hank looked at me with a glimmer of hope. What are you going to do, Gus? I'm going to finish my audit, I said. I have seen the paperwork. Now I have seen the theft. It is time to present my findings. I put a $100 bill on the table for the coffee. And Hank, I added, you are rehired with a 20% raise and back pay for the last 2 months. Hank's eyes widened. But the farm, they are selling it. Not today they aren't, I said. I walked out of the bar and into the dawn. The sky was turning a bruised purple. I held the USB drive tight in my pocket. I had the financial records proving they planned to dump Sarah. I had the legal proof that the power of attorney was coerced. And now I had video evidence of felony theft. I got back into my truck. The engine roared to life. I wasn't going to hide in the shed anymore. I was going to drive right up to the front door. I was going to walk into that kitchen, and I was going to drop a nuclear bomb on their breakfast table. Bradley thought he was a businessman. He thought he was a player. He was about to find out what happens when you steal from a man who built his empire pouring concrete over the things that stood in his way. I shifted into gear and headed back to the farm. The sun was coming up, and it was time to shine a light on the rats. I kicked the back door open with the toe of my boot. The sound of the latch breaking was satisfying, but it was nothing compared to the noise I was about to make. Inside the kitchen, the air smelled of expensive coffee and sizzling bacon. Richard, Patricia, and Bradley were sitting around the island, eating a breakfast fit for royalty, while my daughter was nowhere to be seen. They looked up as I entered. Richard froze with a fork full of eggs halfway to his mouth. Patricia adjusted her silk robe, looking at me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered in off the street. I did not say a word. I marched up to the granite countertop and slammed the heavy stack of papers down right in the center of their meal. The plates jumped. Coffee spilled from Richard's mug, staining the cuff of his white shirt. The photos of the gambling debts, the foreclosure notices, the emails plotting to abandon Sarah, and the still frames of Bradley selling the stolen combine splayed out across the table like a winning poker hand. I know everything, I said, my voice low and vibrating with the rumble of a coming storm. I know about the $400,000 you owe to the loan sharks in Jersey. I know about the foreclosure on your condo in Bridgeport. And I know you sold my $500,000 combine for pennies on the dollar to a fence in the next county. I pointed a finger at Bradley, who had turned a shade of pale gray that matched the kitchen tiles. Grand larceny, Bradley. Embezzlement. Conspiracy to commit fraud. I have the security footage. I have the witness testimony. And I have the financial records. I waited for the panic. I waited for the begging. I waited for them to scramble to explain themselves. But that is not what happened. Richard stared at the papers for a long moment. He picked up the photo of the letter from Vinny the loan shark. He looked at it, then he looked at me. And then he started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a deep belly laugh of genuine amusement. He wiped a tear from his eye and tossed the photo back onto the pile. "You are a resourceful old badger, aren't you, Gus?" he said, picking up his fork and returning to his eggs. "I have to admit I underestimated you. I thought you were just a senile wallet with legs." I stared at him, stunned by his audacity. "Did you not hear me, Richard?" I asked. "You are facing prison time. I am calling the state police." "Go ahead," Patricia chimed in, buttering a piece of toast with infuriating calmness. "Call them." Call the FBI while you are at it. It will not change a thing." She gestured gracefully to Bradley. "Show him, son. Show him why his little detective work is nothing but a waste of paper." Bradley stood up. His fear was gone, replaced by a smug arrogance that made me want to break his nose. He walked over to a leather briefcase sitting on the chair next to him. He dialed in the combination, clicked the latches, and pulled out a single, pristine document. He slid it across the counter toward me. It was the power of attorney. But it was not just the one Sarah had shown me. This one was notarized, stamped, and filed with the county clerk. Attached to it was a signed affidavit from Dr. Vane stating that Sarah Wainwright was mentally incapacitated and unable to manage her own affairs. "Read it and weep," Gus Bradley sneered. "It is ironclad. Sarah signed over full control of the estate, the assets, and the business operations to me. She signed it willingly in front of a notary, and because of this medical certificate, her signature on anything else is void. I am the legal owner of this property, in everything but name, and as the legal guardian of her assets, I have the right to liquidate them as I see fit, to cover debts and operating costs." Richard took a sip of coffee, smiling over the rim of the mug. "That combine you were so worried about," Richard said. "Bradley sold it to pay off urgent business debts. Perfectly legal. My gambling debts. Well, those are just consulting fees I charge the estate for my expertise. Also legal. You see, Gus, you are playing checkers, while we are playing three-dimensional chess. You cannot arrest us for stealing what is legally ours to manage." I felt the blood pounding in my ears. They had covered their tracks with a layer of legal sludge so thick it would take years to cut through in civil court. By the time a judge looked at this, the farm would be paved over, and they would be in Boca. "You coerced her," I growled. "You threatened to take her son. That makes this contract void." "Prove it," Patricia said sharply, her voice losing its faux sweetness. "It is her word against 3 upstanding citizens and a medical professional. Sarah is a hysteric. She is unstable. Who is a judge going to believe? A successful business family or a woman who cries because the floor is wet?" She stood up and walked around the island, stopping inches from me. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of venom. "You know, Gus, I see where she gets it. The weakness. It is genetic, isn't it?" She took a sip of her mimosa and smiled, a cruel twisting of lips that revealed her rotten soul. "Sarah is pathetic," Patricia spat. "She is soft. She lets people walk all over her. She cries when things get hard, just like her mother." The air left the room. My wife, Martha. She had died 5 years ago from cancer. She fought until the very end with a grace and strength these people could not even comprehend. "Do not speak about my wife," I whispered, my hands curling into fists. "Oh, I will speak about her," Patricia continued, smelling of alcohol and malice. "We did our research, Gus. We know all about Martha. We know she was a simple woman, just like you. No ambition, no spine. She raised a daughter who is exactly the same, a cow made for milking. Sarah gave us this farm because she is desperate for approval, just like Martha was desperate for you to be something more than a dirt farmer." Richard laughed again. "It is true, Gus. You bred a victim. We are just the predators nature sent to thin the herd. Sarah signed those papers because deep down she knows she is not capable of running this place. She knows she belongs on her knees scrubbing floors. It is her natural state." Patricia leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Face it, Gus. You failed. You failed your wife because you could not save her. And you failed your daughter because you raised her to be sheep in a world of wolves. Now get out of my kitchen. Before I have Bradley call the sheriff and tell him you are harassing a mentally ill woman and her legal guardians. I looked at them, Richard wiping egg yolk from his chin, Bradley smirking with the power he stole, Patricia glowing with the triumph of her cruelty. They truly believed they were untouchable. They believed that a piece of paper and a fake doctor gave them the right to destroy my family. I did not hit them. It took every ounce of restraint I had built over 70 years, but I did not hit them. Violence would only give them what they wanted. It would give them a reason to lock me up. I picked up the folder of evidence I had thrown on the table. "You are right," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I cannot stop you with this. Not today." Richard raised his glass in a mock toast. "Smart man. Now run along. We have a golf course to build." I turned and walked to the door. But before I left, I looked back at them one last time. "You think Sarah is weak because she is kind," I said. "You think she is stupid because she trusts. But you forgot one thing. She is a Wainwright, and Wainwrights do not break. We just wait for the concrete to set." I walked out the door as their laughter followed me echoing in the morning air. They thought the game was over. They thought they had checkmated the old man. But they didn't know that while they were playing chess, I was about to buy the board, the pieces, and the building they were sitting in. I walked to my truck, my heart cold as ice. They wanted a war. They wanted to talk about legal rights and ownership. Fine. I pulled my phone out and dialed Arthur Blackwood again. "Arthur," I said as soon as he answered, "execute Clause 14B and call the bank. I want to buy their debt. All of it. Every single cent." I looked back at the house where my daughter was being held prisoner by paper and lies. I am coming for them, Arthur. And I am bringing hell with me. Bradley did not even wait for me to get to my truck. He pulled his phone from his pocket and hit a speed dial button with a smug look that told me he had been waiting for this moment for months. He did not call 911 like a man in danger. He called the private line of Sheriff Brody, a man whose re-election campaign I had refused to finance 3 years ago. I stopped with my hand on the door handle of my pickup, watching as Bradley put the phone to his ear and pitched his voice into a fake tremor of fear. "Sheriff, this is Bradley, down at the Wainwright estate. You need to get here now. It is my father-in-law, Gus. He is having an episode. Yes, another one. He is violent, Sheriff. He just threatened my mother, and he is refusing to leave the property. I think he has a weapon." He hung up and looked at me with eyes dead as a shark. "You have about 5 minutes, Gus," he said, his voice dropping the act instantly. "Brody is patrolling the highway just 2 miles out. If you are still here when he pulls in, you are spending the weekend in a holding cell. And with that medical affidavit I just showed you, 72 hours of observation in the psych ward is standard procedure." I looked at Sarah. She was standing by the island, her face drained of color, her hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles were white. "Dad," she whispered, "just go. Please, just go. They will hurt you." "I am not leaving you, Sarah," I said, stepping back toward the house. But before I could reach the porch, the gravel crunched under tires. A cruiser slid into the driveway, lights flashing silently in the morning mist. Sheriff Brody stepped out, adjusting his belt. He was a big man who used his badge to bully people who could not fight back. He walked up the steps, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Mr. Wainwright," Brody said, his voice flat. "I have a report of a disturbance." I turned to face him. "Sheriff, this man is holding my daughter hostage. He has committed fraud and embezzlement. I have the evidence right here." I reached for the folder in my truck bed. "Do not reach for anything," Brody barked, stepping forward and unsnapping the strap on his holster. "Hands where I can see them, Gus." Bradley rushed out of the house, waving the power of attorney document like a flag of surrender. "Sheriff, thank God you are here," Bradley panted, playing the victim perfectly. "He is confused. He thinks he still owns the farm. He broke into our shed last night and slept there. He has been stalking us. Look at these papers. I am the legal guardian of the estate and of Sarah. He has no right to be here." Brody took the papers. He barely glanced at them. He knew exactly what he was doing. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Gus, these papers are signed by a judge. They say you are not allowed on the premises without guardian supervision. And Mr. Bradley here says you are trespassing and making threats." "He is lying," I said, my voice steady though my blood was boiling. "That document was obtained through coercion, and the medical report is a forgery." Brody shook his head. "That is for a judge to decide, Gus. Right now, I have a property owner asking me to remove an intruder. You have two choices. You can get in your truck and drive away voluntarily, or I can put you in cuffs, impound your vehicle, and we can discuss your mental state down at the station." I looked past Brody to the kitchen door. Sarah was trying to push past Patricia to get to me. Patricia shoved her back, hard. "Stay inside, you stupid girl," Patricia hissed. Sarah screamed a sound of pure heartbreak that tore through me. "Dad, help me. Do not leave me with them." I took a step forward. Brody pulled his taser. "Do not do it, Gus," he warned. "Do not make me put you down." I froze. If I fought, I would go to jail. If I went to jail, I would be locked away for days, maybe weeks, while they solidified their hold on the farm. I would miss the meeting with my lawyer. I would miss the chance to trigger the clause that would save everything. I would be powerless, caged, and labeled insane, just like they planned. I looked at Bradley. He was smiling. It was a small victory smile. He thought he had cornered the old wolf. He thought the game was over. I looked at Sarah one last time. She was sobbing in the doorway, held back by the woman who had enslaved her. Her eyes were pleading, but I knew I had to break her heart to save her life. "I am leaving, Sheriff," I said, raising my hands slowly. "I am going." "Smart choice," Brody said, holstering the taser. I walked to my truck. My legs felt heavy as lead. Every step away from my daughter felt like a betrayal. I opened the door and climbed in. The engine turned over with a roar that sounded too loud in the morning quiet. As I backed out, Richard stepped out onto the porch. He was holding a coffee mug, leaning against the railing, with the casual arrogance of a man who thinks he is untouchable. He watched me roll down the window. "Go on then, old man," Richard called out, his voice dripping with triumph. "Go back to your lonely little life, and do not bother coming back for the gala. We will send you pictures of the demolition." He laughed and took a sip of his coffee. "This is our land now," Richard shouted. "You are just a memory, a bad memory we are about to erase." I shifted the truck into drive. I did not look back at Richard. I did not look back at the sheriff, who was watching me leave with his arms crossed. I looked only at the upstairs window where I knew Sarah would be watching. "I am coming back," I whispered to the empty cab of my truck. "And when I do, I am not bringing a folder of papers. I am bringing a wrecking ball. I drove down the long driveway, past the ridiculous iron gates, past the security guard who smirked at me as I left. I turned onto the main road and watched the farm disappear in my rearview mirror. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back the violence that wanted to explode out of me. They had won the battle. They had humiliated me on my own land. They had used the law to protect their crimes, but they had made one fatal mistake. They let me leave. They thought they were getting rid of a senile old man. They didn't know they were releasing a titan who was about to call down a storm. I reached for my phone and dialed Arthur Blackwood. "Arthur," I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. "They kicked me out. Now execute the purchase. Buy the debt. Buy the bank if you have to. I want to own the air they breathe by Saturday night." I walked into the penthouse suite of the Ritz-Carlton, leaving the dust of the farm on the doormat. Arthur Blackwood was already there, sitting in a leather wingback chair with a glass of single malt scotch in one hand and a stack of legal briefs in the other. He did not look up when I entered. He just slid a crystal tumbler across the mahogany table towards me. It was time to shed the skin of the helpless old grandfather. I went into the marble bathroom and looked in the mirror. The man staring back was tired, but his eyes were burning with a cold blue fire. I washed the grease from my hands. I shaved the gray stubble off my chin. And then I opened the garment bag Arthur had brought. Inside was my armor. A charcoal gray bespoke suit cut from Italian wool, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that cost more than Richard's car payment. I dressed slowly, methodically. With every button I fastened, I locked away a little more of my mercy. When I walked back into the living room, Arthur whistled low and impressed. "Welcome back, Gus," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "You look like you are ready to foreclose on a small country." "I am not foreclosing on a country, Arthur," I said, pouring myself a drink. "I am foreclosing on a nightmare. Did you prepare the paperwork?" Arthur tapped the thick file on the table. "Clause 14B is armed and ready." I nodded. When I gifted the farm to Sarah, I had Arthur insert a dormant clause into the deed. It was a poison pill designed for exactly this scenario. It stated that if the beneficiary was found to be under duress, coerced, or chemically altered during any transfer of power, the original grantor had the unilateral right to revoke the gift immediately. The medical affidavit Bradley had waved in my face this morning, the one claiming Sarah was mentally incompetent, was the trigger. By proving they had declared her unfit, they had inadvertently activated my right to take the farm back. As of 20 minutes ago, when Arthur filed the emergency motion with the state court, the property legally reverted to me. They were throwing a gala on my land, drinking my wine and selling my dirt, but they were trespassing. "But taking the farm back is not enough," I said, staring out the window at the city skyline. "They hurt my daughter, Arthur. They tried to steal my grandson. I do not just want to evict them. I want to bury them." Arthur smiled a shark-like grin that terrified his enemies. "I thought you might say that. So I made the calls you asked for." He pulled a second, thinner folder from his briefcase. "I got in touch with Vinny in Jersey, and the private equity firm holding the note on Richard's condo in Bridgeport." I took the folder. Inside were the transfer of debt agreements. "Richard owes $400,000 to the Sharks and another $300 to the bank," Arthur explained. "He is leveraged to the hilt. When I offered to buy his debt for 60 cents on the dollar, they almost kissed me." I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, gold fountain pen. I signed my name at the bottom of the purchase agreement. The ink flowed black and permanent. With that signature, I became the owner of every single bad decision Richard had made in the last 10 years. I owned his gambling debts. I owned his mortgage. I owned the shirt on his back and the watch on his wrist. "So I am the priority creditor now?" I asked, closing the folder. "You are the only creditor," Arthur corrected. "You own the paper, Gus. You can call the note due whenever you want. And since the collateral for the private loan was his personal assets, you can take everything. His car, his furniture, his future earnings." I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I felt strong. I felt dangerous. "Call the sheriff, Arthur, not the local clown, Brody. Call the state police. Tell them we have a situation involving grand larceny, fraud, and trespassing. And tell them to meet us at the main gate at 8 o'clock. Arthur checked his watch. "The gala starts at 7. I know I said walking to the door. Let them have their appetizers. Let Richard give his speech. Let them feel like kings for one last hour. Because when I walk through those doors, I am going to turn their carriage back into a pumpkin, and this time there will be no glass slipper." I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. The sad old man in the flannel shirt was dead. Augustus Wainwright was back, and he was coming to collect. The Wainwright farm had been transformed into a grotesque parody of luxury. The rustic charm was gone, buried under rented white tents, fake crystal chandeliers, and enough cut flowers to bankrupt a small florist. A valet service was parking Ferraris and Bentleys in the field where I used to grow corn. The air smelled of expensive champagne and desperation. Richard and Patricia had pulled out all the stops for this gala. They had invited every hedge fund manager, real estate speculator, and social climber within 100 miles. They needed fresh money to keep their Ponzi scheme afloat, and tonight was their big pitch. I watched from the shadows of the tree line near the service entrance. Through the open French doors of the ballroom, I could see Richard working the room. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him a little too well. Probably custom-made with the money Bradley stole from selling my combine. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. He was in his element, a con man surrounded by marks. Patricia was fluttering around him like a moth attracted to the smell of money. She was wearing a floor-length silver gown that shimmered under the lights. But it wasn't the dress that made my blood run cold. It was the necklace she was wearing. A vintage sapphire pendant surrounded by diamonds. My wife's necklace. Martha had worn it on our 20th anniversary. She had kept it in a velvet box in her nightstand, intending to give it to Sarah on her 30th birthday. But Sarah had never received it. We thought it had been lost during the move. Now I knew the truth. Patricia had stolen it right out of my dead wife's jewelry box. Seeing it on her neck, resting against her pale, greedy skin, was a violation that made me want to tear the tent down with my bare hands. I shifted my gaze to the kitchen window. I could see movement inside. Sarah was there, dressed in the same black uniform as the hired catering staff. She was carrying a heavy tray of hors d'oeuvres, her head bowed as she wove through the crowded kitchen. She looked exhausted, her movements mechanical. A young waiter bumped into her, spilling wine on her tray. Sarah flinched, looking terrified, and immediately started apologizing, wiping the mess with her apron. My heart broke. They had not just stolen her inheritance, they had stolen her identity. They had convinced her she was nothing more than a servant in her own kingdom. Bradley was standing near the kitchen door, acting as the gatekeeper. He was barking orders at the staff, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He looked nervous. He knew the house of cards was shaking. He grabbed Sarah by the arm as she tried to pass, whispering something harsh into her ear. She nodded quickly, tears shimmering in her eyes, and hurried back to the stove. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying the power of reducing his wife to a subordinate. It made him feel big. Inside the ballroom, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the small stage erected at the far end of the room. Richard stepped up to the microphone, tapping it to get attention. The crowd quieted down, turning their eager, greedy faces toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed, his voice amplified across the estate. "Welcome to the future of leisure. Welcome to the Wainwright Country Club." Applause rippled through the room. Richard beamed, soaking it up like a dry sponge. "When my family and I acquired this property," he continued, lying with the ease of a sociopath, "we saw beyond the dirt and the weeds. We saw potential. We saw a sanctuary for the elite, a place where business is done on the greens and legacies are built in the clubhouse." He paused for dramatic effect, looking out over the crowd. "Some people said we were crazy to dream this big. They said you can't turn a simple farm into a world-class resort. But the Wainwrights don't listen to naysayers. We are visionaries. We are builders." He gestured to the large screen behind him, which displayed a digital rendering of the proposed golf course. It showed lush green fairways replacing my wheat fields, a massive glass and steel clubhouse standing where my barn stood, and a parking lot covering my vegetable garden. "Tonight," Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we are offering a select few of you the chance to get in on the ground floor. We are selling exclusive founding memberships. $50,000 secures your legacy, but spots are limited. We already have interest from investors in Dubai and London." Another lie. There were no investors in Dubai. There was only Vinny in Jersey and a mountain of debt. "My son Bradley, the architect of this vision, has worked tirelessly to make this happen," Richard said, waving Bradley onto the stage. Bradley walked up, puffing out his chest, trying to look like the tycoon he pretended to be. He shook his father's hand, two thieves congratulating each other on a successful heist. "And of course," Richard added, "none of this would be possible without the unwavering support of my beautiful wife, Patricia." Patricia glided onto the stage, touching the stolen necklace at her throat, smiling a smile that looked like a crack in porcelain. "We are a family business," Richard declared, putting his arms around them. "A dynasty. And tonight, we invite you to join our family." The crowd cheered. Waiters began circulating with silver trays, collecting pledge cards and checks. I saw men pulling out checkbooks, eager to throw their money into the fire. I looked at my watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock. The time for speeches was over. The time for reckoning had arrived. I adjusted my tie and stepped out of the shadows. 2 state troopers fell in step behind me, their boots crunching on the gravel. Arthur Blackwood walked beside me, carrying a briefcase that contained the end of Richard's world. We walked past the valet stand, past the stunned security guard who tried to radio ahead but stopped when he saw the troopers. We walked up the front steps and through the double doors. The noise of the party died down as we entered. It started as a ripple near the door and spread inward like a wave of silence. People turned to stare. They saw the troopers. They saw Arthur in his power suit. And they saw me. Not Gus the farmer. Augustus Wainwright, the titan of industry. I didn't stop. I walked straight down the center aisle, the crowd parting before me like the Red Sea. Richard saw me. His smile faltered. His cigar fell from his fingers and rolled onto the stage. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her throat to cover the necklace she knew didn't belong to her. Bradley took a step back, looking for an exit that wasn't there. I reached the edge of the stage. I didn't climb up. I didn't need to. I stood on the floor, looking up at them, and for the first time in months, I was the biggest thing in the room. "Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the silence without a microphone. "You forgot to introduce one member of the family," Richard stammered, his face turning the color of ash. "Gus, what are you doing here?" "Security! Get this man out!" But the security guards didn't move. They were looking at the state troopers standing behind me with their hands on their belts. "I am here to make an investment," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I heard you were selling memberships." "Yes," Richard said, trying to regain control, trying to laugh it off. "But I think this is a bit out of your price range, Gus. Why don't you go back to the kitchen and get a snack?" I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "Actually," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I am not here to buy a membership. I am here to buy the whole show." I pulled out the purchase agreement for his debt. I held it up. "I bought your debt, Richard, all of it. The loans from Vinny, the mortgage on your condo, the notes on your cars. I own it all." The crowd gasped. Richard looked like he was going to vomit. "And as the sole creditor of your entire existence," I continued, "I am calling the note due. Right now." I signaled to the technician in the booth, the one Hank had paid off an hour ago. The image of the golf course on the big screen flickered and died. In its place, a video began to play. It was the security footage from the barn. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough. It showed Bradley driving the combine onto the flatbed truck. It showed the man handing him the bag of cash. It showed Bradley counting the money and laughing. Then the audio played. Patricia's voice rang out over the speakers, clear and shrill. "Those idiots will buy anything if we put a gold label on it. We just need to get their checks, pay off the shark, and dump the property before the zoning board realizes we forged the permits." The crowd erupted. The wealthy investors who had been reaching for their checkbooks were now recoiling in horror. The murmur of confusion turned into a roar of outrage. Richard stood on the stage, stripped naked in front of the people he had tried to impress. Patricia looked around wildly, realizing her social climb was actually a free-fall. Bradley looked at the screen, watching his crime play out on a 20-foot loop. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, turning to the crowd, "my name is Augustus Wainwright, and you are trespassing on my property. This party is over." I looked back at the stage. Richard was trembling. Patricia was crying. Bradley was frozen. "But don't worry," I added. "The entertainment is just beginning." I nodded to the troopers. They stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from their belts. The sound of ratcheting metal was the only applause they were going to get tonight. The room was teetering on the edge of violence. Richard stood on the stage, clutching the microphone like a lifeline, his face a mask of sweating wax. He tried to laugh, a high-pitched sound that cracked in the middle. He waved a hand at me dismissively, trying to convince the room full of sharks that I was just a senile old man rambling about debts. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for security that wasn't coming. "This is clearly a misunderstanding, a prank. My father-in-law has a very unique sense of humor. The debt he mentions is an internal family matter, a restructuring of assets. We are fully liquid. We are solvent. The golf course is fully funded." He was losing them. I could see it in the eyes of the investors. They were shifting in their seats, clutching their checkbooks tighter. But Richard was a salesman until the bitter end. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and pointed to the massive screen behind him, where the digital rendering of the clubhouse was still glowing with promise. "Look at the vision," he shouted, trying to drown out the murmurs. "Look at the future. We are building a legacy here." Do not let one confused old man distract you from the opportunity of a lifetime. I checked my watch. It was time. I did not say a word. I just raised my hand and snapped my fingers. High above us in the control booth, Hank hit the kill switch. The ballroom plunged into absolute darkness. The expensive rented chandeliers flickered and died. The spotlights on the stage vanished. For a second, there was total silence, followed by the sound of expensive jewelry rattling as nervous hands clutched pearls and diamonds. A woman screamed, a short, sharp sound of panic. Then the screen flickered to life. It was not the polished, high-definition rendering of the golf course anymore. It was grainy black-and-white footage, time-stamped 3 weeks prior. The date and time glowed in the corner in harsh neon green. The camera angle was high, looking down from the eaves of the equipment barn. The image was unmistakable. A flatbed truck idled in the shadows. Bradley was there wearing a hoodie, but his face was clearly visible in the glow of the truck's headlights. He was directing 2 men as they loaded my John Deere combine onto the trailer. The massive machine, worth more than the house Bradley grew up in, groaned as it was winched up the ramp. The silence in the ballroom was heavy, suffocating. Every eye was glued to the screen. On the video, the driver of the truck stepped out. He handed Bradley a thick gym bag. Bradley unzipped it. He pulled out a stack of cash, holding it up to the light, counting it with a greed that made him look like a caricature of a villain. He laughed on the video, a soundless movement of his head thrown back in triumph. He shook the driver's hand and slapped the side of the stolen machine as it drove away. In the darkness of the ballroom, the real Bradley let out a whimper. It was the sound of a dog that knows it is about to be put down. But we were not done. The video faded to black, but the audio feed remained live. The speakers crackled. A voice filled the room. It was sharp, condescending, and unmistakable. It was Patricia. "I cannot believe they are actually buying it," the voice sneered. The recording quality was crystal clear, taken from the hidden microphone I had planted in the kitchen days ago. "Look at them," Patricia's voice continued, dripping with venom. "They walk around in their little suits, thinking they are important. But they are just sheep. Sheep with wallets. We just have to shear them before they realize there is no grass in the pasture." A collective gasp went through the room. I saw men in tuxedos stiffen. I saw women cover their mouths. Another voice on the recording answered. It was Richard. "As long as we get the deposits by Saturday, we are clear. We pay Vinny, we pay the lease on the Benz, and we get the hell out of here before the zoning commission realizes those permits are forged." Forged. The word hung in the air, amplified by 10,000 watts of power. Patricia's voice laughed again. "Do you think they will be mad when they find out the clubhouse is just a rendering?" "Who cares?" Richard replied. "By the time they figure it out, we will be in Boca. Let the old man deal with the lawsuits. He will be dead or in a home by then anyway." The audio cut with a sharp screech of feedback. Then the lights slammed back on. They were blindingly bright. The sudden illumination caught Richard and Patricia on stage like cockroaches when the kitchen light flips on. Patricia was frozen, her hand clutching her throat, her face a mask of pure terror. Richard looked like he had been shot. His mouth hung open. His cigar had fallen to the floor, burning a hole in the rented carpet. I stood in the center of the aisle, but I was no longer alone. While the room was distracted by the screen, the double doors behind me had swung open. Marching in with the precision of a military unit were 4 men in dark suits, carrying leather briefcases. They were the senior partners of Blackwood and Associates, the most feared litigation team in the state. And leading them, walking shoulder to shoulder with me, was a man whose uniform commanded instant silence. It was not the local sheriff. It was Colonel James Sterling of the state police. His hat was tucked under his arm, his badge gleamed under the lights, and his face was carved from granite. Behind him were 6 state troopers, their hands resting on their belts, their eyes scanning the room for threats. The crowd parted instinctively, scrambling to get out of the way. We walked forward, a phalanx of law and order, cutting through the sea of corruption. The sound of our footsteps on the hardwood floor was the only noise in the room. Click, clack, click, clack. I stopped at the foot of the stage. I looked up at Richard. He was trembling so hard the microphone stand was rattling. "I told you I was bringing a wrecking ball, Richard," I said, my voice calm but projecting to the back of the room. Colonel Sterling stepped up onto the stage. He did not ask for permission. He did not apologize. He walked straight up to Richard and took the microphone from his limp hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," the colonel said, his voice booming, "this gathering is now a crime scene. I need everyone to remain calm and stay where you are. We are executing federal and state warrants for the arrest of the individuals on this stage." A woman in the front row fainted. A man near the back tried to run, but a trooper blocked the door. The room erupted into chaos. Investors were shouting, demanding their checks back. People were pulling out their phones, recording everything. One of the lawyers, Mr. Blackwood's senior partner, stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. He walked up the stairs to the stage and slapped the papers into Richard's chest. "Mr. Richard Davenport," he announced loud enough for the camera phones to pick up. "You are hereby served with a notice of foreclosure and immediate asset seizure. Your debts have been consolidated and called due by the primary creditor, Augustus Wainwright." He turned to Patricia, who was trying to hide behind her husband. "Mrs. Patricia Davenport, you are also served. We have a civil suit for the theft of jewelry valued at $50,000 and a criminal complaint for elder abuse and conspiracy to defraud." Then he pointed at Bradley, who was cowering near the curtain, trying to find a way out. "And Mr. Bradley Davenport, we have a warrant for your arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and forgery." Richard looked at the papers in his hand. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wet. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was a scared little man who had played a game he didn't understand. "Gus," he whispered the microphone, picking up his pathetic plea. "Gus, please, we can work this out. We are family." "Family," I repeated. I climbed the stairs slowly. I walked across the stage until I was standing right in front of him. I reached out and took the fake Rolex from his wrist. He didn't stop me. I dropped it on the floor and crushed it under my heel. It crunched like cheap plastic. "You are not family, Richard," I said. "You are a bad investment, and I am liquidating the asset." I turned to the crowd. The investors were watching me wide-eyed. These were men who respected power, and in that moment, I was the most powerful man they had ever seen. "If any of you wrote a check tonight," I announced, "I suggest you cancel it. Unless you want to donate to the legal defense fund of a man who just admitted to forging government permits." The room was a flurry of movement as men scrambled to tear up checks and cancel transfers. Patricia lunged at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of hate. "You ruined everything!" she screamed, her hands clawing at the air. "You jealous, bitter old man! You ruined our lives!" A trooper intercepted her before she could get within 5 feet of me. He grabbed her wrists and spun her around. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. "You have the right to remain silent, ma'am," the trooper said, "though I doubt you have the ability." Bradley tried to run. He bolted for the backstage exit, knocking over a stand of flowers. But Hank was there. My old farm manager stepped out from behind the curtain, his arms crossed, his face grim. He didn't even have to touch him. Bradley took one look at Hank and stopped, terrified. 2 troopers moved in and cuffed him, dragging him back to center stage. Richard was the last to fall. He looked at his wife in cuffs. He looked at his son in custody. And then he looked at me. He slumped his knees, giving out, hitting the stage floor with a thud. "Why?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. "Why did you have to do it like this? You could have just taken the farm back. Why destroy us?" I looked down at him. I thought about Sarah scrubbing the floor. I thought about my grandson in a boarding school. I thought about the email plotting to leave my daughter destitute. "Because you broke the one rule, Richard," I said, leaning down so only he could hear me. "You mistook my kindness for weakness, and you touched my daughter." I nodded to the colonel. "Get them out of my sight." The troopers hauled them up. They marched them across the stage, down the stairs, and through the center aisle. The crowd parted in silence, watching the royal family of the Wainwright Country Club being dragged away like common criminals. Cameras flashed. People whispered. The shame was absolute. But I wasn't done. I turned to the screen where the video of Bradley was still paused on a frame of him counting the stolen money. I signaled the booth. "Kill it, Hank." The screen went dark. The house lights came up full brightness, stripping away the mood lighting and exposing the cheap decorations for what they were. I walked to the microphone. "This party is over," I said. "Everyone go home." I stepped off the stage and walked toward the kitchen. The lawyers were already packing up their briefcases. The colonel gave me a nod of respect as I passed. I didn't stop. I had one more thing to do. I had to find Sarah. I had to tell her that the monsters were gone. I pushed open the kitchen doors. The staff was frozen, standing around in silence, having heard everything through the walls. Sarah was in the corner, sitting on a stool, her head in her hands. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were red, her face pale. "Is it true, Dad?" she whispered. "Did they really say those things? About me? About Mom?" I walked over to her and pulled her into a hug. I held her tight, shielding her from the wreckage of the night. "It is over, Sarah," I said. "They cannot hurt you anymore." She buried her face in my shoulder and sobbed. It wasn't the quiet, scared crying I had seen before. It was the loud, heaving sobs of someone releasing a year of poison. I let her cry. I let her wash it all away. Behind me, the sound of cars starting and tires crunching on gravel filled the night as the guests fled the scene. The gala was dead. The country club was a memory. But as I held my daughter in the kitchen I had built for her, I knew that something else was just beginning. The weeds had been pulled. The soil had been turned. It was time to plant again. The handcuffs were tight around Bradley's wrists, but his mouth was still running a mile a minute. He was thrashing against the grip of the state troopers, screaming at the top of his lungs like a man who believed that if he just yelled loud enough, the laws of physics and justice would bend to his will. The ballroom was clearing out, but the silence left behind by the fleeing investors only made Bradley's desperation louder. He twisted his neck, looking back at me and Arthur Blackwood with eyes that were wide with panic and a lingering trace of entitlement. "You cannot do this!" Bradley screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You can arrest me for theft, but you cannot take the farm! I have the power of attorney. It is signed. It is legal. I am the guardian of this estate. Even from a jail cell, I control the assets. I will sue you, Gus. I will tie this property up in probate court for 20 years. He was right about one thing. A power of attorney is a powerful weapon. In the hands of a skilled lawyer, it could freeze assets and block transfers even during a criminal investigation. Richard, who was slumped in a chair nearby, looked up with a glimmer of hope. If they still held legal control of the land, they still had leverage. They could trade the farm for a plea deal. They could burn it down out of spite. Arthur Blackwood walked over to Bradley calmly. He did not shout. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who was about to put a sick animal out of its misery. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. It was not a new court order. It was the medical affidavit Bradley had shown me in the kitchen just 12 hours ago. The one signed by the discredited Dr. Vane, claiming Sarah was mentally incapacitated. "You are referring to this power of attorney?" Arthur asked, holding up the document. "The one that grants you total control over Sarah's life?" "Yes," Bradley shouted, his face turning red. "It is notarized. You cannot touch it." Arthur smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "Actually, Bradley, you are the one who destroyed it." Bradley stopped struggling. "What are you talking about?" Arthur held up the medical affidavit next to the power of attorney. "You paid $50,000 to a forger to create this medical report." Arthur explained, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "This report states that Sarah Wainwright has been suffering from severe cognitive decline and psychosis for the last 6 months. It states she has been unable to understand contracts or make legal decisions since January." "So what?" Bradley spat. "That just proves I need to be her guardian." Arthur shook his head slowly, savoring the moment. "Think, Bradley. If Sarah has been mentally incompetent since January, as your fake doctor claims, then she did not have the legal capacity to sign this power of attorney in March." The color drained from Bradley's face. He stopped breathing. "A person who is legally insane cannot enter into a contract," Arthur continued relentlessly. "By forging this medical report to prove she was crazy, you inadvertently proved that her signature on the power of attorney is void ab initio, invalid from the start." Arthur dropped the papers on the floor at Bradley's feet. "You played yourself, son. The moment you paid for that lie, you burned the only bridge you had. The power of attorney is worthless. The deed never transferred." I stepped forward. I wanted him to hear this from me. "And that brings us to Clause 14b, I said. The clawback provision. Since the transfer of management was based on fraud and coercion, the ownership of the Wainwright Legacy Farm reverted to the original grantor exactly 24 hours ago when we filed the evidence with the state court. I pointed a finger at his chest, right over his pounding heart. I own this farm, Bradley. I have owned it since yesterday. Which means when you sold those memberships tonight, you were selling property that did not belong to you. That is not just fraud. That is wire fraud, securities fraud, and theft over $1 million. Bradley looked at the papers on the floor. He looked at Arthur. Then he looked at me. The reality finally hit him. He had spent months building a trap for my daughter, but he had forgotten that he was standing on the trap door. He had paid $50,000 for the hammer that just smashed his own life to pieces. "No," he whispered. "No. That is not fair. We planned everything." "Plans require intelligence," I said. "You just had greed." Richard let out a low moan and put his head in his hands. He understood. It was over. They had no leverage. They had no assets. They had nothing but a long prison sentence and a debt they could never repay. "Take him away, Colonel," I said, turning my back on him. "I am tired of looking at trespassers on my land." As the troopers dragged Bradley toward the exit, his shoes scraping uselessly against the floor, he didn't scream anymore. He just started to cry. It was the sound of a man who realized he had held a winning lottery ticket and set it on fire because he wanted to see it burn. I looked at Arthur. Good work. Arthur closed his briefcase. "It is done, Gus. The farm is yours. The debt is secured. And Sarah is free." I nodded, looking toward the kitchen doors. Legal freedom was one thing, but Sarah needed more than a court order. She needed to see justice with her own eyes. She needed to see the monsters shrink. And I knew exactly how to help her do it. I walked toward the kitchen, ready to give my daughter the only gift that really mattered: her life back. The state troopers had Bradley halfway to the door when I raised my hand to stop them. They paused, looking at me for confirmation. I did not give it. Instead, I looked toward the swinging doors of the kitchen. This was my house and my land, but the war that had been fought inside these walls was not mine to finish. I had fired the legal cannons, but the final execution belonged to the woman who had scrubbed the floors on her knees. Sarah pushed the doors open. She was still wearing the stained catering uniform, smelling of dishwater and grease, but she was not looking at the ground anymore. She walked into the ballroom with her head high, her eyes dry and burning with a cold fire that I recognized immediately, because it was the same fire that had driven me for 40 years. She did not look at me. She did not look at the lawyers. She walked straight toward Patricia, who was standing near the edge of the stage, still clutching a half-empty glass of red wine she had snatched from a passing tray in her panic. A desperate attempt to look composed while her world collapsed. Patricia saw Sarah approaching, and her lip curled in a reflex of disdain. Even in handcuffs, even facing ruin, she could not help herself. "Oh, look," Patricia sneered, her voice shrill and trembling. The maid finally decided to join the party. "Did you come to clean up the mess your father made, Sarah? You look pathetic." Sarah stopped inches from her. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. She reached out calmly and took the crystal glass from Patricia's hand. Patricia let it go, thinking for a split second that Sarah was taking it to serve her, to refill it like a good little servant. Sarah looked at the dark red liquid swirling in the glass. Then she looked at Patricia's silver gown, the one she had bought with stolen money, the one she wore like armor. "You always told me I was clumsy," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, ringing through the silent room. "You told me I was messy. You told me I was a stain on this family." Patricia blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Sarah flicked her wrist. It was not a violent throw. It was deliberate. A splash of crimson wine arced through the air and landed squarely on the chest of the silver gown, soaking into the expensive silk instantly, spreading like a gunshot wound. Patricia gasped, looking down at the ruin of her dress in horror. "You little witch!" she shrieked. "This is Valentino. Now it is trash. Sarah said, dropping the empty glass on the floor where it shattered. Just like you. Just like the way you treated me. You came into my home and treated me like dirt. Now you can wear the dirt. She turned away from Patricia, leaving the woman screaming about dry cleaning bills while facing felony charges. Sarah walked over to Bradley. The troopers loosened their grip slightly, allowing her to step into his personal space. Bradley looked at her with wet, desperate eyes. He saw the wine on his mother's dress, and he saw the steel in his wife's spine. But he still thought he could play her. He still thought he knew the combination to her lock. "Baby," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Baby, please." "You have to tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I am your husband. We can fix this. I did it for us, Sarah. I did it so we could be rich." Sarah looked at him. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had trusted with her life and her child. She looked at the sweat on his forehead and the cowardice in his soul. "You did not do it for us," Sarah said softly. "You did it for you. You sent our son away, Bradley. You sent Leo to a boarding school so you wouldn't have to hear him cry while you plotted to steal his inheritance." "That is not true," Bradley lied, reaching for her hand. "I love Leo. I love you. Do not let your father do this. He is manipulating you." Sarah laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "My father is the only man in this room who has never lied to me," she said. She pulled her hand back. She wound up her arm and she struck him. It was not a slap of hysteria. It was a slap of finality. Her palm connected with his cheek with a sound like a cracking whip. Bradley's head snapped to the side. A red handprint blossomed instantly on his pale skin. "That is for Leo," Sarah hissed. She stepped closer into his face until their noses were almost touching. "And this is for me. I am filing for divorce in the morning, Bradley. I am taking my name back. I am taking my son back, and I am taking my life back." Bradley stared at her, stunned into silence, holding his stinging cheek. "But where will I go?" he whispered, the reality of his homelessness finally sinking in. "I have nowhere to go." Sarah looked around the opulent ballroom, the fake luxury, the stolen dreams. "I suggest you ask your mother," she said. "She seems to think she owns the place. Or maybe you can sleep in the shed. I hear it is dry enough." She turned to the troopers. "Get him out of my house." The troopers nodded, gripping Bradley tight and dragging him toward the door. He didn't fight this time. He just hung his head defeated. Not by a lawyer or a sheriff, but by the wife he had underestimated. Sarah watched them go until the doors closed behind them. Then she took a deep breath, her shoulders dropping as the weight of 3 years of abuse finally slid off her back. She turned to me. She didn't smile, but her eyes were clear. "Is Leo safe, Dad?" "He is waiting for us," I said. "The car is out back." "Let's go get him," she said, walking past the shattered glass and the spilled wine without looking down. "I have a bakery to reopen." I watched her walk away, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a Wainwright. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. I adjusted my jacket, signaled Arthur to wrap up the scene, and followed my daughter out into the night. The farm was ours again, but more importantly, Sarah was hers again. Richard watched the troopers drag his weeping wife and broken son out the double doors, and for a split second, I saw the gears turning in his desperate mind. He was not thinking about how to help them. He was not thinking about bail money or lawyers. He was looking at the side exit, the one used by the caterers, He was thinking about the vintage Jaguar parked out back, the one asset he thought was still safe, the getaway car that could take him across state lines before the dust settled. He took a step toward the shadows, trying to make himself small, trying to slip away like a thief in the night. "Going somewhere, Richard?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but it stopped him dead in his tracks. He froze, one foot hovering over the floorboards. He turned slowly to face me. His tuxedo was rumpled, his face was gray, and his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an escape route that did not exist. "I am leaving, Gus," he stammered, trying to summon a shred of his old arrogance, but failing miserably. "The show is over. You made your point. You got the farm back. Congratulations. But I am walking out of here. I have rights. You cannot hold me." I stepped into his path, blocking the exit. I was not holding him. The gravity of his own mistakes was holding him. "You were right, Richard," I said. "I got the farm back. But we are not done. You seem to be forgetting something very important." I reached into my inside jacket pocket. Richard flinched, thinking I was going for a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out the transfer of debt agreement, the ink still fresh from where I had signed it in the hotel room. "What is that?" he whispered, eyeing the paper. "This," I said, holding it up to the light, "is the master key to your life. You see, Richard, when my lawyer called the private equity firm holding the note on your condo in Bridgeport and the loan sharks in Jersey, they were very happy to hear from us. They were tired of your excuses. They were tired of your bounced checks. So they sold your debt to me." Richard's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. You bought my debt?" he choked out. "Every cent," I confirmed, taking a step closer. "I own the $400,000 you owe to Vinny. I own the $300,000 on your condo. I own the $80,000 on your credit cards. I am your bank, Richard. I am your landlord. And I am your executioner." He shook his head, tears of panic welling in his eyes. "No, you cannot do that. That is illegal." "It is capitalism, Richard," I said coldly. "You should appreciate it. You preached about it enough at dinner. And as your primary creditor, I am exercising my right to immediate asset seizure to cover the outstanding balance." I held out my hand, palm open. "The keys, Richard." He clutched his pocket protectively. "My car," he whimpered. "It is a 1961 E-Type. It is the only thing I have left." "It is not your car," I corrected him. "It is collateral, and since you are in default, it is my car. Give me the keys or I will have the colonel add grand theft auto to your list of charges." Richard looked at the state police colonel standing behind me. He looked at my hand. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy silver key fob. He dropped it into my palm. It felt cold and heavy. "Thank you," I said, pocketing them. "I will have it towed to the auction house in the morning." Richard let out a sob. "Fine. Take the car. Take it all. I will go home. I will figure this out." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Home?" I asked. "You mean the condo in Bridgeport?" "Yes," he said, gaining a tiny bit of defiance. "It is my home. You cannot touch my home." I checked my watch. "Actually, Richard, you do not have a home anymore." While we were enjoying the gala, my associates were busy changing the locks. The eviction notice was posted on the door 20 minutes ago. Your furniture, your clothes, your fake art collection. It has all been seized to pay down the interest on your loans. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just watched his own funeral. "You are homeless, Richard," I said, leaning in close so he could smell the coffee on my breath. "You have no car. You have no house. You have no money. And in about 5 minutes, when the troopers finish processing your wife and son, they're coming back for you." He looked around the empty ballroom. The investors were gone. The staff was gone. It was just him and the wreckage of his life. "Gus, please," he begged, falling to his knees. "Where am I supposed to go?" I looked down at him. I remembered him sitting in my chair, eating my food, mocking my daughter. "I hear the county jail has vacancies," I said. 3 hots and a cot." "It is more than you deserve." I signaled the colonel. "He is all yours." As the troopers moved in to cuff him, Richard did not fight. He just collapsed, weeping into his hands. A man stripped of everything he valued because he never valued the things that actually mattered. I turned and walked away, the weight of the Jaguar keys in my pocket, a reminder that the bill always comes due. The flashing blue and red lights of the state trooper cruisers washed over the white tents, turning the scene into a surreal carnival of justice. I watched from the gravel drive as Richard was shoved into the back of a squad car. He was still pleading, still trying to negotiate a deal with a trooper who looked at him like he was something he had scraped off his boot. Patricia was already in another car, her face pressed against the glass, her mouth moving in a silent scream of entitlement that no one would ever listen to again. Bradley sat in the third car, head bowed, broken, not by the handcuffs, but by the realization that he was not the protagonist of this story. He was just the villain who got caught. The investors fled the scene like rats sensing a sinking ship. Valets were throwing keys at owners who peeled out of the pasture, spinning their expensive tires in the dirt, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the Wainwright scandal. Within 20 minutes, the lot was empty, save for the police cars and my old Ford truck. The silence that followed was heavy, but clean. It was the silence of a fever breaking. Hank walked up to me, carrying a heavy iron crowbar in one hand and a bottle of kerosene in the other. He looked at the massive black and gold sign at the entrance, the one that read, "The Wainwright Estate and Country Club." "Do you want to keep it as a souvenir, Gus?" he asked, nodding at the sign. I looked at the pretension, the gold leaf paint, the fake crest they had invented. It represented everything they had tried to turn my family into. Fake, hollow, expensive trash. "Burn it," I said. Hank grinned. He walked over to the stone pillars. He jammed the crowbar behind the mounting bracket and heaved. There was a screech of tearing metal, a sound like a dying animal. The heavy sign crashed into the gravel, face down. Hank doused it in kerosene. He struck a match and dropped it. The flames roared up, licking the black paint, turning the gold to soot. We stood there, watching it burn. The heat felt good against the night chill. It felt like cauterizing a wound. Arthur Blackwood walked over, loosening his tie. "The troopers are taking them to the county lockup," Arthur said. "The arraignment is in the morning. I will be there to ensure bail is set high enough that they will need a ladder to see over it." "You do that, Arthur," I said, watching the paint bubble and peel. "And make sure the eviction team clears their personal junk out of the house by noon tomorrow. I want the smell of them gone." Arthur nodded. "Consider it done." He got into his car and followed the police convoy, leaving me and Hank by the fire. I looked at Hank. "Get the crew back tomorrow, Hank. Get the tractors running. Tear down these tents. I want this place looking like a farm again by Monday. Hank saluted with 2 fingers. You got it, boss. I turned and walked toward the house. The gala was ash. The pretenders were in cages. But the real work was just starting. I had to see if the foundation I had built 40 years ago was strong enough to hold the weight of what just happened. I found Sarah sitting on the front porch steps. She had changed out of the catering uniform and was wearing jeans and a sweater. She was holding Leo, my grandson, who was asleep in her lap wrapped in a blanket. We had picked him up from the boarding school an hour ago. He was safe. He was home. I sat down on the step next to her. The wood was cold and hard. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crickets and the crackle of the burning sign in the distance. Sarah did not look at me. She was staring out at the dark fields where the moon was illuminating the rows of neglected wheat. I am sorry, Dad, she whispered finally. I am so sorry I let them in. I am sorry I was weak. I reached out and tucked the blanket around Leo's sleeping form. You were not weak, Sarah, I said, my voice low. You were blind. There is a difference. You saw what you wanted to see. You wanted a family. You wanted peace. And they used that against you. She looked at me then. Her eyes were dry, but they looked older than they had yesterday. The naivety was gone, replaced by a hardness that made me sad, but also relieved. Innocence is a luxury you cannot afford when you own something worth stealing. I almost lost him, she said, stroking Leo's hair. I almost lost everything because I was afraid to say no. But you didn't, I said. You fought back. That slap in the ballroom, that wasn't fear, Sarah. That was ownership. I pointed to the fields. I gave you this farm 6 months ago because I thought you needed a safety net. I was wrong. You didn't need a net. You needed a fortress. And you needed to learn how to defend the walls. I stood up and dusted off my suit pants. The debt is bought. The title is clear. The pests are gone. But I am not going to run this place for you, Sarah. I am 70 years old. I have fought my wars. This is your land, and now you know exactly what it costs to keep it. Sarah stood up, shifting Leo to her hip. She looked at the burning sign, then back at me. She stood straighter. Her chin came up. I know what to do, Dad, she said. Hank and I will have the bakery running in a month. We will replant the north field. And I am changing the locks tonight. I nodded. That was the answer I wanted. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the deed to the farm. The new one Arthur had drawn up. It was clean. No clauses. No power of attorney. Just her name. It is yours, I said, handing it to her. Do not let anyone take it from you again. Not a husband, not a bank, not anyone. I will not, she promised, taking the paper. I walked to my truck. I was tired. My bones ached. But my heart was light. I opened the door and climbed into the cab. I looked out the window one last time. Sarah was standing on the porch, holding her son, watching over her land. She looked like a queen who had just won a bloody revolution. I started the engine. I didn't wave. I just put the truck in gear and drove down the driveway. I passed the smoldering remains of the country club sign. I passed the open gate. I turned onto the main road and headed for the highway. I left her there, not because I didn't care, but because she didn't need me anymore. She had learned the hardest lesson a parent can teach. She learned that the only hand that will truly save you is the one at the end of your own arm. And as I drove into the night, I knew the Wainwright legacy was safe, because it was being guarded by a woman who had walked through hell and come out holding the keys. I used to believe that love meant smoothing the path for your children, shielding them from every hardship. I thought if I gave Sarah a farm, I was giving her freedom. I was wrong. By protecting her from the world, I almost let the wolves eat her alive. I learned that true generosity isn't just giving someone a kingdom. It's teaching them how to defend the walls. You cannot buy respect, and you cannot gift self-worth. Those things have to be forged in the fire. Today, Sarah isn't just a landowner. She is a warrior. And that is the only inheritance that truly matters. If you believe that family is about loyalty, not exploitation, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where justice is served cold.